So, good evening and welcome to the Sacramento Public Library Sacramento Room program. Tonight, we are fortunate to have the curator and creative force behind Central Library's current exhibit, Take Me to the Water, Black Histories of the Pacific, and that's Dr. Caroline Collins. The exhibit will be with us at Central Library through March 16th. It's toured by Exhibit Envoy and supported by Cal Humanities and the National Endowment for the Humanities. We're really lucky to have it. I've already pushed out a PDF about upcoming talks, and one thing to just mention about that is that each talk sort of builds on the next. So you'll definitely want to go to every one. You better be there because I'll be watching. Yeah, there are a total of 4. So it'd be great to have you at all. And then of course I mentioned the Bruce Marwick Gene Kennedy program this Saturday at 1 o'clock. Hope you can make that. Okay. All right. And more folks are just coming in here. And then, like I said, this talk is going to be recorded. Even our brick and mortar talks are going to be recorded. So they're eventually going to be on YouTube, and we'll always have them around on SPL's YouTube page. Okay. So tonight, I am honored to introduce Dr. Caroline Collins, who is a UC President's Postdoctoral Fellow at UC Irvine's Department of History and has been researching in the same capacity at UC San Diego in the Department of Communications. Dr. Collins received her PhD in Communications from UC San Diego in 2019. So we are very, very grateful and very honored to have Dr. Collins here with us. And with that, I'm gonna start things off, Dr. Collins. So I was wondering if you could help us build a little bit of context for tonight's talk by, in a few sentences, describing your wonderful exhibit.
Thank you so much, James. I'll be happy to do so, but I first just want to say thank you for putting this beautiful slate of programming together. Thank you to the entire staff and folks at the Sacramento Public Library for hosting the event. And thank you to all y'all for coming out on a Thursday night. Like, I know everyone has things in their life, so I appreciate that. So Take Me to the Water, Histories of the Black Pacific is a multimodal public history project that explores Black folks' long connections to what's now the US Pacific. So California, Oregon, Washington, Alaska, and Hawaii. And it covers a broad swath of time from the 16th century to the mid 20th century. And it's a really important way for us to think about Black folks' relationships to water and watercraft in ways that often travel against some mainstream narratives. So generally, when people in America think about Black folks and ships, one type of ship comes to mind, and that's the slave ship. And when they think about Black people's relationships to water, the body of water that's most heavily comes to mind is off the Atlantic. And that's because of really important history about the transatlantic slave trade that needs to be told and has all kinds of material implications. But it doesn't cover the entire rich complexity that is the Black American experience. Because we know that Black connections to boats, they really do extend beyond the slave ship. And we know that Black relationships to water travel beyond the Atlantic. And so this particular project really helps us think about some nuanced, different ways to think about the rich tapestry of Black folks' connections to water and watercraft.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Collins. So one great way, in addition to tonight's talk, to sort of understand your connection to the exhibit and all the different dimensions to it, is to take a look at a really great article that you wrote. And it's entitled Water Birth, Charting My Journey to the Black Pacific. And it's really about your personal voyage to prepare for and then launch 3 exciting projects. One is the exhibit, which is now at Central. One is building a whale boat with young people, and then a documentary that covers its construction. And as I read the article and I looked at all these different dimensions to the project, it feels way more kinetic, way more energy driven, action oriented than just a traditional article or monograph. And I was hoping you could speak to that.
Thank you for bringing up that article. You never quite know who's, gonna uncover them. And that particular piece was important to my research trajectory because it was a moment in time where I was really kind of revisiting and rethinking how we as scholars often engage in the practice of reflection. So generally, when we do this type of writing, if you think about like the scientific method, whether it's social science or in STEM, you kind of have an idea and a hypothesis, and you do your experiment, or you go do your work, or whether that's a project with a community university partnership, and you see what happens, you collect your findings, and then you have some conclusion and write about it. And in this particular piece, I was writing about it while I was still doing a lot of thinking about the project and was still kind of in this ideation, incubation kind of phase that I still am in some of the other moving parts of it. But the project was, gaining all kinds of steam. I was really involved and excited about it, but when I would talk to potential partners, funders, or other cultural institutions like museums, other folks, I was excited to see just how intrigued they were about the subject matter. And the project was really just starting to take, it was starting to move in really interesting ways. And at that point, I thought it was important to kind of pause and stop and reflect on what kind of led me to this particular project, why I felt it had so much importance personally and professionally. And in doing that, I did kind of write about what it means to do this hands-on kinetic practice, like you mentioned, to have an action-oriented project. And I found how much this was just a return to all kinds of ways of knowing and doing that folks have been doing for so long. The Academy is really starting to get excited about public humanities projects and public facing projects, and that's great. But people have been sharing information like this since time immemorial through, the telling of stories about our past and sharing publicly who we think we are and who we're not and what kind of values we hold dear. And so that writing was really realizing that this project in many ways, while the Academy saw it as groundbreaking in particular ways because it wasn't just a book or it wasn't just an article. It was also just a return to how I'd already learned things in the past, whether it was the way I grew up in the Black church and don't go anymore, but you would learn through song and dance and movement, that we as humans have a really rich toolkit in how we come to understand things. And so I think it was just a disservice to my own research if I felt the only output could be a traditional book. There's just so many ways that we can learn and do.
Thank you for that answer. So kind of tied to that, that whole element of action is the fact that in a lot of ways, you could go ahead and write a book or write an article or do some other bit of content creation just by sitting at your computer or sitting in your office. But you did not do that. You actually had to hit the road. And as everyone comes into Central Library and takes a look at this just remarkable exhibit, you'll see that Dr. Collins procured several different artifacts from travels up and down the Pacific coast into the Pacific Northwest, Southern California. And so I was wondering if you could talk about what that was like as an actual, journey, someone going from, repository to museum up and down the West Coast.
Yeah, that was an amazing experience. One, quite a bit I was also able to do digitally. Thank you to all the archivists and special collections managers and folks who are digitizing archives. And in many ways, that's democratizing archives. But quite a bit did really require travel. And I'm thankful to the National Endowment for the Humanities that really helped with a lot of that planning. It was quite a few of the sites were my children were with me, and my youngest has gone into many archives with me often. In the beginning, it was just because of just a need. I needed to bring him with me. He has some special needs. And then also over time, it was something that he really enjoyed doing. So I was in archives throughout California and Oregon and Washington, a lot of the states I mentioned earlier, Alaska, Hawaii, also in DC, in the Smithsonian. And what was beautiful was, again, just how much was out there, which is something I've seen with other projects I've worked on, whether an exhibit on the Buffalo Soldiers in Los Angeles, or another traveling exhibit on Black folks' long connections to rural California. Often there can be this misconception that these stories about Black history aren't told just because, there's a dearth of information. And but if you go into the archives and you look, that information is there. There's a record of our presence, and so that was really exciting to see. Some of the things that might end up in the gallery exhibit. One was this compass that I saw in. I also went to Canada, to British Columbia, and it had belonged to Charles and Nancy Alexander. And they had come in the 1850s. They had already fled from Missouri and gone overland to California, seeking more freedoms. And they were part of folks, especially after the passing of the Fugitive Slave Act, who also then left California and went north up to British Columbia. And so they had carried that compass with them across all of these thousands of miles over land and by sea. And when I was holding it, in my hand, just thinking, what did that mean? That there was no Zillow, there wasn't a Yelp. Often people were traveling just off of word of mouth, off of Black newspapers sharing information, letters that other people would share, and carrying. They had their family Bible. They had this big chest he built, and he had a compass. So that was really a piece that was very exciting to me. And likewise, Annie Small, another story of travel. Felicia Gaston is a public historian in Marin City, and she has a large collection of items from Marin ship workers during World War II. And she has a suitcase from Annie Small, who was a woman who traveled from Shreveport, Louisiana to California, who was so intent on coming and getting a job in the shipyards that when she got on this huge crowded train that couldn't find a seat, she sat on her suitcase the entire time out. And so, both of those artifacts kind of just represent to me also, the way that coming to the Pacific or traveling north or coming out west also is a story of connection in many ways, new beginnings. And both of those were autonomous trips that folks, and again, a lot of times when we talk about Black people and journeys that we've had to make, has been under duress or through enslavement. And those are very important histories that must be told because they still have implications today. But again, there's all of these other stories as well.
Thank you, Dr. Collins. Next question, and by the way, everybody, these are my questions. You may not like all my questions, but you are going to have a chance to ask your own questions to Dr. Collins as we end up here. But my next question is of all your travels, all the different sites along the Pacific coast, what were some of the most important finds you made? And in addition to that, what surprised you the most?
I mentioned things like the suitcase and the compass, a lot of the crew photos of the integrated crews, finding research that other folks have done and on Black folks, sailors' roles and in Hawaii's the Royal Hawaiian Band, how so many of those folks started as I knew that there were quite a few whalers who kind of Black whalers who made new lives in Hawaii, but seeing the impact that they had even on the musicality of Hawaii along those lines of musicality, like the way that African and African American and Irish and English and Hawaiian music was so integral to seaman shanties, because often when you hear contemporary versions of a lot of those shanties, it very much portrays the European Irish influences, but you don't hear as much of the African and African American and Hawaiian influences as well. Another thing that was surprising, other than just, the items, the documents and the records and the logs and the images, was just how excited many of the archivists and collections managers and librarians were that about the project, and that folks were interested in this. The African American Museum and Library at Oakland, I've worked within their archives quite a bit, and that archivist there, I was finding bits here and finding bits there, and I was looking all across their dispersed collections to find this information that all had this maritime theme. And because of that, he created an online findable guide for folks that's all about Black folks' maritime culture here in California. And so that was really exciting, so that, folks can now, if you don't have to get a plane ticket and go to Oakland, they can go online and find that. And so I don't know if surprising is necessarily the word, but I think it was just really endearing, and I was very heartened by how excited all of these different culture bearers and these cultural institutions were.
All right. Yeah, thank you. And we've actually worked with the African American Museum and Library in Oakland through a lot of different archiving workshops, and they're top notch for sure. Next question. So you lay the groundwork for the exhibit by showing us the really deep heritage of watercraft construction, swimming, in some cases, kids as young as 16 months old, and the cultural connectivity to water in West Africa. You include the following quote, which just grabbed me, an Upper Guinea proverb: the blood of kings and the tears of the canoe maker are sacred things which must not touch the ground. I was wondering if you could speak to that element in West African society, and also to what degree this reverence for water and the makers of ships, how that transferred over to the Black experience in the Pacific.
I'd love to do that. And I actually have some books here next to me that I wanted to make sure I was shouting out, because so much of this project is building upon a lot of rich history that folks have done. And I came across that quote from Upper New Guinea first in this book, Black Jacks by Jeffrey Bolster. And this is a story that looks much more at the Atlantic, but looking at African American seamen in the age of sail. And also another really important scholar or book that I'd love to share with folks is this Kevin Dawson, Undercurrents of Power, Aquatic Culture in the African Diaspora. He's at UC Merced, and he has gone through extensive archives and records in looking at these deep connections that West Africans have had to water and surfing, and how early a lot of these communities were looking at the roots of surfing in Africa that date back 1,000 years, and some of the first written recordings of surfing taking place in Ghana, what's now Ghana, in the 1600s. The fact that in a lot of these coastal communities, many Black children were in the water and swimming by 16 months. They were toddlers. And so I just wanted to shout out a lot of that work, and that this reverence was something where often things like commerce and spirituality were colliding. So people were using water and watercraft in everyday economic activities, but it was also a very big part of their spiritual lives. Many of these communities felt that the underwater was where afterlife took place. You have a figure like Mami Wada, who was so important to many West African cultures and continues to be across the African diaspora here in the what's now the United States as well. And again, that gets me back to things that folks are thinking are revolutionary or new. So something like Disney's Little Mermaid that caused this whole cultural stir. The idea of a mermaid type a figure that dates back, many centuries in West African cultures, and so it was really important that even though the project, of course, was looking at what's now the U.S. Pacific, that it did start with these African roots of in maritime culture and in relationships to water.
Okay, thanks. So a really important element of the Black Pacific project is we have the exhibit, which is again here, everyone. And then we're also going to have a project to build a whale boat. And what I'd like to ask you is, who is involved in building the whale boat and why is that important?
So these second parts of the project are still pending funding.
Okay.
So we had our planning grant from the National Endowment of Humanities, and then we will find out late April if we got the big implementation grant. So everyone can send good thoughts to DC, and hopefully we'll be able to get that funding. So these other parts are to have a physical gallery exhibit, and then to build a 28-foot wooden whale boat. And so that boat will be built by a Black boatwright and a group of youth comprising of especially Black and Indigenous youth and others. And all kids will be involved, working with the San Diego County Department of Education's college and career readiness program, where they put kids into actual real world environments. So kids who might be interested in wood making would be able to take part in this project. And so Black folks were really heavily prevalent in the whaling industry. Often when we see a lot of cultural representations of whaling, you might not see that, but there was a point where 20 to 30% of whalers were of African descent or were Black. And that played a huge deal in the way that some people took to the sea for freedom, the way that some folks ended up settling in places like Hawaii or Alaska. And we know that there were actual, Black whaling captains of as well, many on the East Coast, and a public historian, Skip Finley, writes really beautifully about that in his book, Whaling Captains of Color, but also here in California, and we have a Black whaling captain as well. And so this particular project, I was really thinking about the Hokulea project in Hawaii in the 1970s, where the Polynesian Voyaging Society rebuilt this double-hulled wooden canoe, much like what you see in a movie like Moana. And it became this vessel where they were able to work on it and reinvigorate and reclaim a lot of their ancestral practices, from things like language to celestial navigation, right? And so it was more than just a boat, it's a vessel that still continues to travel. And so I was inspired by that. And so this boat will be a publicly viewed boat build. It'll be on Spanish Landing Park in San Diego, free of charge. So anyone just walking, running, pushing a stroller can stop and see some signage and learn about Black builders. They'll be able to see what it takes on land as well in order to have seafaring and seagoing. And it's also a way to kind of repair harm as well. A lot of that whaling industry was really part and parcel of indigenous dispossession of land and water, of overfishing and overhunting. So it did a lot of environmental damage as well. And so this is a way to kind of have a reparative type of activity. And then once it's built, the youth will take it out and have some well whispering activities. This is based off of an artist in DC, Michaela Harrison, an African-American artist who does this practice of going out and listening to whales. So they'll listen to different mammals and other sea life with these hydrophone technology. And so hopefully we'll get the funding. And if we do, then we'll be in the fall, be engaging in that build. Yeah. And then we'll be filming it, and that's the documentary.
That's right. There's a documentary to cover that. That sounds awesome. And again, it's action, right? There's more action, there's more movement. So one more question. I was curious, what's next at this point?
So again, if we get the grant, looking finishing the curation of the physical exhibit, this traveling exhibit, after it's had its time in Sacramento, we'll also be moving to different stops. San Diego will have it. It's going to be in Oregon. It's going to be during in Port Townsend, Washington as well, during the Wooden Boat Festival that they have there each year. It's the largest wooden boat festival in the US. And then after I complete my my postdoc in this academic year, next year I'll be back at UC San Diego as an assistant professor in the Department of Urban Studies and Planning. So I'm really excited about that, because then I love teaching practicum courses where your students actually get to go out in the world and do a thing. And so I'm hoping if we are building the boat, then students can go out and work on it. And then this project is really related to a program that I have that I work with folks at UC San Diego. Different folks came together and helped create called Black Like Water, where in our signature program is Black Surf Week. So I hope on the horizon, this project will continue to partner with hands-on activities like that with folks on the water.
Okay, sounds exciting. Hey, a comment just came in from one of our viewers. They say, I love how you've reframed the whaleboat symbolism for a whole new generation.
Thank you for that.
Yeah. So with that, everybody, I'm generally done with my questions. I might have a few more things to say along the way, but I sort of wanted to open things up to the group. What questions might you have for Dr. Collins? And while everyone's thinking about a question to ask, I can kind of give my take as an archivist who is trying really hard to, like many archivists across California and across the American West and even the entire country, to decolonize our collections. And one of the best ways, I think, as we move forward, is to change the sort of the spatial relationship between our researchers and our materials. And what better way to do that than have a very graphical exhibit like Dr. Collins' exhibit that instantly changes our collection, it adds something to our collection, and it has massive impact. And looks like here's a comment. I might have missed this, but what was the inspiration for curating this work? Is there a personal connection to this particular topic, or just a general curiosity? And thank you for that question.
Thanks so much for that question. Yes, there is also a personal connection. A lot of my work looks at how we think about the American West, especially through public history sites. So the book I'm writing is on Old Town San Diego State Historic Park, and my family has deep roots in the American West. Like a lot of Black folks, we came out to California during the Great Migration, so some in the 1930s, 40s, 1951. And then in the 19th century, we were in Texas. And one of my favorite family photos is my great-great-grandfather in and around Waco, Texas in like the 1870s, standing in front of his barbershop. And he's got, you know, the handlebar mustache. And so do the other folks standing with him, Black folks. And then there's a group of Mexican cowboys in this bar, a saloon next to him. And so it's, you know, your quintessential picture of the American West in the way that it's often told, but with Black and brown folks who often kind of get erased from these stories. And so, and a lot of my work is thinking about the myth of the American West. And a lot of that myth is often very land-based, right? It's the story that gets told of these rugged individuals who were able to bend wild land and peoples in order to carve out a nation upon it. And so a lot of that work is looking at land, but I've also had these long connections to the water. I've been going to the Pacific since I was a toddler. I'm from San Diego. My family is, you know, my spouse and kids surf, and you know, we snorkel, and you know, the water connectivity is always been this vibrant part of my life. Um, and at UC San Diego, I was thinking about both connections to land and water, not just with Black connections, but also working with a group, Intertribal Youth. And we made a film, Native Like Water, We're Still Here. And so in thinking about these long connections, just in my own personal life to both land and water, that's kind of what started the ball rolling of me thinking about the Black Pacific. And I by no means coined that term. There's a new group of scholars emerging that are thinking about the Black Pacific, Robbie Shilliam and Natasha Sharma. And that comes from Paul Gilroy, who coined the Black Atlantic in the late 20th century, and was talking about this connection that Black folks have across the diaspora that's not just about national borders or cultural borders. And I was thinking about the way that the Pacific likewise has been a site that has helped us reimagine race and migration and diaspora, and thinking of water as a source of connectivity, not just rupture as well. So all of those things led to me thinking about this topic as an exhibit.
Just curiosity, how much money do you make when you're doing that kind of stuff?
I'm sorry, Michael, could you say that again?
How much money do you guys make?
I'm sorry.
How much money are you guys making out when you're making that kind of stuff?
How does it feel?
Yeah.
You know, it's exciting in many ways. I'm going to see the exhibit for the first time tomorrow, and I'm really excited. And I was just asking James about it. And it'll be the first time I've seen it like physically. And so it's exciting when something is living up here for so long and you're not quite sure what are people going to think of it? Are they even going to be interested in it? And so, and sometimes it's a little nerve-wracking too, because I can't speak for everyone, but I felt a sense of responsibility too to all of the people whose stories I'm trying to tell. And I know I could only do it the best way I knew how. And I'm sure it's also really hard to do a banner exhibit. You only have so many words, and there's just so much you could say. And so you feel like I'm leaving so much out. And finally, I came to peace with it when I realized my job is to not try to tell all of this history. There's just no way I could, not even in a book. I'm just hoping I can get folks excited, and then they go out and they read more about the topic, or they see a scholar that I mentioned, or they see an image and they go on a deep rabbit hole on the internet. If that happens, then I'll be excited.
Wow.
Awesome. Thank you, Michael, for the question, and thank you, Dr. Collins, for the answer. And it looks like Krista has a question. When you mentioned go into the archives, what source will that be? The library?
I'm really happy that you asked that, because generally when I'm talking about the archives, like the traditional answer is like at a library, they'll have like a special collections or archival collection. Museums will often have this, historical societies. A lot of times you have to make an appointment though, or you might have to email in advance and find some of these things. And we're more and more, we're trying to talk about the archives too, beyond just these institutions. So I mentioned that other, we're not strangers here. We're also thinking about what does it mean for community archives? What does it mean, if someone sitting in someone's living room while they show you a handmade family tree, thinking about that also as a particular kind of archive. But a lot of it was these buildings that the San Francisco National Park, their maritime history, they have like this huge warehouse of just, all kinds of items and documents and images. And so often it was that university libraries often have archives as well.
Okay, all right. So one thing that you mentioned when you were answering Michael's previous question was doing a banner exhibit is a challenge, right? Because you've got only so much space. What kinds of things did you end up having to leave out that maybe you'd like to mention now? Sorry about that. There's probably lots.
Oh, that's a really good question. I think for California especially, when we were talking about the Pacific also being a route to freedom and folks who took to the water to emancipate themselves, I would have liked to talk even more about how that took place here on the Pacific, and especially talk about like Mary Ellen Pleasant and her role in San Francisco. Would have been nice, to um, especially because a lot of these stories at times were dominated by many men. At least that's what you were finding in the archives, and we know like any story that there's always all kinds of folks who are involved. So I think I would have liked to talk a bit more about her role even more in depth. Um, and I did talk some about Black leisure and water activities, really building and using and relying upon a lot of the scholarship of Allison Rose Jefferson, who has this really beautiful book, Living the California Dream. But I would have liked to even go further in depth than that. But I believe she has an exhibit at the California African American Museum that looks at a lot of Southern California aquatic leisure and Black communities. But I think every different portion of the exhibit probably just could have been expanded by, 3 or 4 additional panels.
Yeah, gotcha. Okay, and just really quickly, I've got everyone's attention. We do have some surveys that Cal Humanities would love to take a look at, and I think Dr. Collins would love the feedback too. I would like it as well. So I'm just going to go ahead and push these out. There's an English language one, and then there's a Spanish language one that we'll push out. So if you could take a look at those sometime, we would be grateful for any feedback you can give. So Dr. Collins, Michael had a quick question. How often do you have to make an appointment?
Okay, good. I'll erase because I was trying to type it quickly to him.
Ah.
So I would say at more than half, especially if you're trying to go into like what's a special collection. If you're going to like into a library and it's just things that are already on shelves, usually you don't need an appointment. But if you're trying to go into things that they have filed away or archived in the back, then quite often you do need some type of appointment in advance. But some you can just kind of show up the day of and tell them that you're there and what kind of question that you have. But regardless, if you have to make an appointment or not, it's always really helpful to just talk to the folks who are managing the archives, because a lot of times and tell them about what it is you're looking into, whether it's a research question or family history, because often they'll point you to things that you might have come thinking I want to see A, B, and C, and they're like, you also really need to look through X, Y, and Z. So that can also be really important.
Okay, thank you, Michael, for that question. Chris Lango, and Chris is actually going to be speaking on the 24th. Hi, Chris.
Hey, James. Question. First of all, congratulations on the exhibit. I saw it, and I hope when you see it tomorrow, you enjoy it. Since you haven't seen it, you enjoy it for the first time as much as I did. And I'm especially interested in the patrolling the Pacific theme. And I'm doing a presentation on Nathaniel Colley on the 24th, who is a civil rights attorney from Sacramento who served in the Pacific, South Pacific during World War II, commanding an all-black chemical company. And it was that experience that changed the course of his life from becoming a chemist to deciding to become an attorney. And so I was wondering for you, how was your research about going through these discriminatory practices and procedures that that were in place during the war in the South Pacific? What kinds of things did you uncover? And if you could just maybe expand on that aspect of your exhibit a little bit.
Thanks for the question, and I'm excited about your project as well. You know, especially when we're talking about being in the archives can be really exciting and invigorating, but often can also be really emotionally draining as well. So at times, and when I worked in the Buffalo Soldiers Project with Susan Anderson at the California African American Museum, I kind of had a lot of this same feeling. When you're looking at these folks who were willing to make an ultimate sacrifice, right? And seeing the way that they were still treated as second-class citizens, looking at the complexity of their roles, looking at the complexity of the Black communities, various communities' reactions to their activities in war, that there were quite a few Black activists and columnists and journalists like Ida B. Wells who would speak out against Black folks participating in what was basically often, expansion of empire, especially in some of the earlier wars in the early 20th century. And so seeing all of the ways that portions of even after the war, so even having the unequal treatment during the war, things like what happened in Port Chicago in Northern California, and then after the war being withheld GI benefits. I mean, that's something that has material implications on economic equality today, right? You saw this huge expansion of the middle class due on the back of the GI Bill, and so many folks were left out of that, including, my own grandfather, paternal grandfather. So so the patrolling the Pacific section, that's probably one to get back to James's question that I wish really could have even expanded and to especially talk about just all of the complexities of that military engagement and the ways that folks were hoping that engaging in this type of activity might be able to help them individually and financially, but also, the double V movement of what it might mean stateside. Would Black folks be able to acquire more equality stateside because of this activity overseas? And so that particular section, it was one that it was draining often when I was kind of doing that work. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. So there was another question. Where did it go? Yikes.
Michael, I see yours, and
Oh,
you don't really make a whole lot in academia, but if you have curiosity and you've just are one of those people who would love to be in school for the rest of your life when everybody else is ready to run for school, then you can have a you can have a good life. You're not going to get rich. Well, maybe there's some intellectuals out there who do, but most will not. But it can be a fulfilling, rewarding career if it's something you're interested in.
For sure. So, hey, Allison asks, you've mentioned the potential community benefits of the Whaling Boat project. Have you seen any exciting reactions to this project or your previous work?
Yes, and then quickly, Cheyenne, I saw that you were asking about a published schedule, and I put in the chat the link to Exhibit Envoy. That's where folks want to book it, and it also has a schedule there. So Allison, as far as like exciting reactions to previous work, it is really exciting to go into exhibits and see the way folks are interacting with them. The Buffalo Soldiers exhibit, where I was the exhibition researcher, Susan Anderson at the California African American Museum curated a really lovely show there. And it was exciting to see parents with children pointing things out. It's always really exciting when you see intergenerational visitors. We're Not Strangers Here that I mentioned earlier. When it traveled to Allensworth State Historic Park, we were able to actually, there was a colleague of mine, Christelle Jensen with California Institute for Rural Studies, and she recorded audio reactions to people seeing the exhibit. So that was really exciting. And when I talk about the Whaling Boat project, since that has not happened though, there is a lot of excitement around it when we talk about actually getting kids out on the water, building a boat, painting it, do all the different moving parts. I'm sure there's going to be all kinds of hiccups and frustrations and, but how exciting will that be when it actually, goes out on the water? And so I'm really hoping that project comes to fruition, and so much of it, that's what a lot of the documentary is all about too, to kind of see the reactions of the kids themselves and then people who are just walking by and watching it as well. Hope that answers your question.
Okay, everybody. So any more questions? Okay, from Allison, comment?
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, all right. So any more questions at this point for Dr. Collins, who again is going to be in Sacramento tomorrow, going to be at Central Library. I can't believe it. It's like having the Beatles come to town after you've listened to them on an LP, right? Right on your little turntable. It's pretty exciting.
I did as well.
Okay. All righty. So, hey, I would just remind everyone, again, don't forget the surveys. Really easy, just through SurveyMonkey. Next week at roughly this time, I've got it right here, Professor Chris Dixon, African Americans in the Pacific War, 1941 to 1945. And that's going to be next week, Thursday at 7. But get this, it's going to be Friday for Professor Dixon, because Professor Dixon is in Sydney, Australia. So it's going to be Friday, but it's going to be 2 p.m. So just get your head around that. So I just finished reading it. It's really, really great. I learned a lot. The research was meticulous, and I even learned something about censorship schedules that are available at the National Archives. So it's very, very interesting stuff. So that is also going to be a Zoom program. And so the handout that I'm going to push out one more time to you all has the long, crazy Zoom link, but you can go ahead and cut and paste it out of the PDF. You can also go to our events page and there's a link right there. And it looks like Krista, hi Krista, has a question for Dr. Collins.
I actually made some really nice comments in the chat section, but I just wanted to actually ask you about the book. You said the book was going to be pretty much gone over at the next virtual.
Yeah,
gathering?
so we're going to have Dr. Dixon join us, and what he'll do is he's going to go ahead and give probably a 10-minute or so preamble, and then we're just going to dive into a very similar Q&A, and then we'll open it up to everybody who wants to ask any questions.
Thank you so much for your time, Dr. Collins, and Mr. James Scott as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Krista. All right.
I saw Eric's comment. Yes, I would very much like that. If you go to Caroline Collins UCSD online and Google me, you should be able to get my email address. That would be really amazing to chat with you about that.
Yeah, thank you, Eric, for that comment. All right, and then we've got another message. Okay, great. Thanks, Eric. Okay, any other questions? All right. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Collins, for your time tonight. Just thanks for your time. Thanks for the thoughtful questions. And of course, thanks for the work that you're doing. It's so important. And thanks to everybody for joining us tonight. Again, please join us next week, Thursday at 7 o'clock for our next program. I think if you go to all 4 events, I might come up with like a diploma. All right. So I'm going to be keeping track right up here. Okay. All right. So again, this is also video recorded. So it's going to be in our YouTube page. So tell friends, and you can just watch this again if you'd like. Okay. So with that said, good night, everyone.